Ever wish you could get inside an investor's mind to know exactly what they're looking for when they talk to early stage companies? Well, now we're going to do just that as investors and investor relations experts tell you how they approach relationship building with founders before they're looking to raise their next round.
Hello, everybody. I'm Frank Gruber. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Established, a consultancy that helps organizations with innovation, startup, and communication strategies. Our mission is really to help wherever and whenever possible discover, promote, foster, connect, build, and or fund innovation that can change the world for the better. So we have a program called Startup of the Year. Kind of, you see the letters here. That's what that stands for. And it's a year-long program looking and searching for startups with diverse backgrounds. And we pull them all together for the title of Startup of the Year and an opportunity at building relationships and potential investment from our other arm, Established Ventures. So myself, I'm a venture partner with NextGen Venture Partners and invest in over 25 companies myself. And I've got a great panel here today. We're going to be talking about building relationships with investors before you actually need their money and how to build that digital Rolodex up beforehand. So to kick it off, we've got Jomira Herrera. She's from Cowboy Ventures. She's a senior associate with Cowboy Ventures. She has been there for a little while now, and she focuses on early stage and growth stage companies, both as an investor and operator. Jomira, you want to share a little bit more about what you're up to?
Yeah, happy to. So like you mentioned, I'm at Cowboy Ventures. We're a seed stage focused fund investing across multiple categories and sectors, generally leading or co-leading rounds. And we've been around for about 8 years now. Before this, I helped build the family office for the Jobs family, and I focus on early and growth stage investing, like you mentioned. And I started my career on the operating side.
Excellent. And you are a Florida lover, I found, a native.
I am a Florida native. I don't know if I would describe myself as a Florida lover, but I was born and raised in Orlando, Florida, but I've been in the Bay Area for about 10 years now.
Excellent. All right, next up, we've got Brendan Schmidt. He's with Sierra Ventures, and he joined in 2017 and leads business development and operations for the firm, as well as a number of other things. Brendan, you want to share a little bit more what you're up to?
Yeah, well, I'm also a Florida native, so from Jacksonville. Sierra, we've been around for almost 40 years now. Really excited, just kicked off our 12th fund, started investing out of that in February, came in at around 220 mil. Really excited about, we have what we call a come early, stay late approach. So we tend to get in, back founders in the seed or A stage. But really cool, we get to work with them all the way through exit. So we joke that we're bad party guests. We come early and stay late. And mostly, sector focus, next gen enterprise software, emerging technology, and, kind of be pretty geo-agnostic, back founders all across the US, other parts of the globe. So, yeah.
Thanks for joining today. And last but not least, we've got Frank Williamson. So another Frank. I'm not used to seeing so many Franks on the same phone call or whatnot, but welcome, Frank, from Oaklyn Consulting. He's based out in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Oaklyn Consulting is a different kind of investment banking firm for private companies. Frank, share a little bit more what you're up to.
So we help business owners complete mergers, acquisitions, capital raising, and do a lot of investor relations for people as they're planning to raise money or, obviously planning to get, major deals done, joint ventures, distribution deals, other things like that.
Excellent. Also a Florida native or?
Unfortunately, not a Florida native for this panel. And I'm the only Tennessean in the context of this conference too.
Nice. I am not a Florida native either, but do frequent there sometimes. So, all right. So we're 50-50 on that. All right, so let's dive in. We want to help folks learn how to build relationships before they need them. So let's go around the horn and whoever kind of wants to jump and raise your hand first. But basically, want to kind of figure out what's the ideal situation for a founder or C-level executive to connect with you, or connect. If they're out trying to raise a round of funding, what's the best way for them, to connect with a startup, or how's a startup founder connect with you?
I'm happy to take a stab at that. So for us, we like to focus on accessibility. We always say that founders can reach us in any way. So we have a hello@cowboy.vc email where anyone can submit their pitch and can submit their deck. We respond to every single person that sends us an email and falls within our criteria, and we promise that everyone takes a look. And so we focus on accessibility. In terms of ideal way to reach us, I think most people say this, which is it's always great if you can find a way to get some kind of warm intro, especially through a referrer that we know and that we trust. So either it is a founder within our portfolio, or someone that we've co-invested with, or an operator that we think really highly of and that we really respect. We take those referrals super seriously. But at the end of the day, what we care about is accessibility, because there's a lot of great ideas all across the country, and we want to make sure that we see them. So we have an open door policy.
Makes sense. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, I think, same thing, Jamira. It's pretty easy to find out our email convention, just first dot last name at sierraventures.com. Definitely mindful about responding to every entrepreneur, knowing what it's like being in their shoes. But it's human nature to, gravitate towards some of those warm intros. I would say, as a CEO founder, it's critical to do your homework, right? So, you're going to work hard, be persistent. I think that's, find any medium you can to reach these folks. We even joke, one of our companies in portfolio, they used to be in a building and literally did an elevator pitch to one of our managing partners. So there's no shortage of ways to get in front of investors, but I think, work smart, do your homework. I think you're going to spin your wheels in the wrong direction and maybe take away some of the time that you can be running your business by being more efficient in the fundraising process, by finding kind of a warm intro.
Makes sense. Frank.
I think you two have such good advice for people. One of the things we tell folks we're working with is remember that the close ratio when you're talking to investors is something like 1%. And so go out getting to know people with that idea in mind. They're going to be 99 no's for a yes. And then think about how you make your time, Brandon, to your point, how do you make your time efficient so it doesn't get wasted and the investor's time doesn't get wasted too? And so know your metrics, get your material together so the pitch makes sense to someone who needs to put in money and get it back. And then third, probably know that you're recruiting. What you're going to get at the end of this is money and a business partner. And if you're not interviewing someone who's an investor at the same time they're interviewing you, you're just missing an opportunity to pick up someone who could be a great asset to your business, and maybe getting someone who's not the best fit.
Yeah, that's a great point. And obviously, you don't know where anything's going to go. Anybody could end up anywhere at some point, right? They may be an investor today and a operator tomorrow and back to an investor, or maybe a startup founder. Who knows? People jump around a lot. So I think that's a great point. You don't ever know where anyone's going to end up. So my thought is always treat everyone the same with that same amount of respect that you would, and obviously try to build a relationship off of that. So curious to dive in deeper. How do you then build a relationship? Obviously, do you guys, you have a limited amount of time, right? So what's the best way, for, the startup founders out there, they're obviously trying to build a relationship with you, aside from just making, getting a chance to pitch you or whatever. Like, what are some, tips around that? Because I think that's a harder thing now these days, especially with everyone being a little bit more at home and whatnot. I
can take another stab at that. In terms of building a relationship, one way is obviously spending some time and grabbing kind of, I guess now these days, a virtual coffee, just getting to know each other. So even though we can't meet each other in person, a lot of people are saying that we lose a lot through that. I have found that in some of the deals that we've done just in the past couple of months, I've actually spent more time with founders than I normally would have, because there's so little friction to hopping on a Zoom. I'm like, oh, hey, I'll email them or I'll text them and be like, hey, can we talk about X, Y, and Z thing? And then we get on a Zoom for 30 minutes. Or, hey, why don't we just get on a Zoom and do something a little bit more social to get to know each other better. And so in some ways it's easier to build relationships because there's just less friction about having to schedule and having to find the right time and the right place to meet together. But that's one way to build a relationship. Another way is I have founders that put me on their monthly or their quarterly update list or update listservs, so that I'm getting information about how their company is doing. And it's little friction on their end, little friction on mine. It doesn't take a bunch of time for either of us, but it helps us maintain that relationship over the time. And the last thing I'll note is I think there is a difference between building a relationship when it's super early stage. So we focus on seed stage. So the time from which they start and the time from which we invest isn't that long. So sometimes there isn't that much of a time period to build a relationship. But when I was focused on growth stage, sometimes I would build a relationship with founders for a year or 2 years in advance of a financing. And that ranged from going to visit their offices, meeting the management teams over time, doing more social events, having them come to our offices and meet some of the rest of our team. And so the other thing to think about is how do you build relationships, especially at later stages. That's where I get a little bit more concerned, because not meeting in person there feels a little more stressful than at the early stage.
That makes a lot of sense. And those are some great tips for today, and what we can talk about a little bit more later, but great advice. Anybody else wants to jump in with that?
Yeah, I think there's two sides of this, right? How should, in the mind of a CEO, how should you be thinking about this? And when we think about what CEOs' priorities are week in and week out, it's really threefold in this order. So number one, do not run out of money. That is your number one job. And that doesn't have to be, you have to, secure funding. You could, have a bootstrap business and be very successful, but, you're the chief fundraiser of the company. And then number two, if you don't run out of money, you can raise, good amount of money. You can hire the best talent. And then in there, you can build the best product. So all of them kind of filter into each other. So I think it's an important practice week in and week out to schedule some time for investor relationships, because the number one thing that I see, in between, if I meet a founder that maybe just raised their seed and they're going to their A, is how are they going to stay top of mind with me? So I think, Jamira, you mentioned, quarterly updates, monthly updates. Those are great. I think sometimes they're too long in the body of the email. So I think it's always good to maybe, here's like the top 3 to 5 bullet points, and put an attachment there. And if they want to read more to it, I'll sift through that. It's a really good way to stay on top of it. If you're doing like a webinar or a panel or something that's thought leadership driven, and you're getting like really interesting customers participating on that, I may join that and say, hey, really love the content. Let's connect afterwards for a 30-minute call. And then it goes without saying, if you're building a good relationship, you're really kind of clicking together, it's okay to kind of reach out on an informal basis. And, maybe there's a couple, I would say non-work related things you bond over. Say, hey, how did that vacation go? I saw, you post on LinkedIn. So I think there's like a lot of different pieces to staying top of mind. But I think the biggest thing is really differentiating from, there's a lot of noise coming at me day in and day out. So how are you going to differentiate and really, attract some of the investors to continue to build that relationship and get in touch with you?
Great advice. Frank, do you have anything to add or thoughts?
I think these guys are telling super stories around which the headline I hear is just remember people are busy.
Yeah.
Doing lots of things. Jamira, I love your point about, some things actually are working better on Zoom. There's not driving to go meet for coffee. You can actually get there. And at least I've found like a lot of the conversations tend to jump into the business stuff a little bit faster than we would if we were just meeting for coffee, where, and maybe that's right for this kind of relationship. It's great to have good personal rapport, and obviously you can't do it without it. Mm-hmm. But in the end, it's a business relationship that everyone's trying to build.
So you probably all heard that when you're looking for money, ask for advice, and when you're looking for advice, ask for money. Do you still believe that that's still the case with everything that's going on? We
find it's a pretty good way to approach it. Don't forget the point. As long as everyone knows in the end what's there. But if we find that when people are out looking for advice, they tend to share the good and the bad of what they're doing, and sort of share, here are the challenges I'm facing to get from one place to another. And as long as that challenge can be solved with more money, it leads to a good money conversation. Sometimes there are challenges that aren't solved with more money. in which case don't expect it at the end of the meeting.
I would add on to that. I think it's okay to be vulnerable as a CEO. You're not going to have everything figured out. I think as investors, there is going to be a collaborative part of the relationship at some point. So it's okay to kind of get the gears running on, hey, by the way, I don't have everything figured out, but I was kind of thinking X, Y, Z on the vision 2 years out. And I think as well, you can figure out, is this a partner I want to, quote unquote, be married to for the next 5 to 7 years or whatever it may be. So I think the other part of it too is you're not in this alone. On the other side of it too, on how do I think about the strategy? It's okay to go to your previous investors, your advisors, your board members. It's going to be a daunting thing. Each round is going to be like a huge win in its success when you close that out, and you should celebrate that. But shouldn't be, I would say, feel like it's too daunting. Like figure out, ask for help from, your support system in getting those warm intros, or at least like figuring out, of these 200 investors, where, who are the 50, 100 we should be spending.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's super important to ask for advice, be vulnerable. And one thing we look for is self-awareness. It's really important for you to know what you don't know, because that's a super important and valuable characteristic as a CEO and as a founder. You have to be able to know when you need to ask for help. One thing I will note though is we have a lot of founders that reach out that are asking for advice, but really what they want is to fundraise and what they want is to raise money. And what I'd rather do for everyone's sake is that you're upfront and you say, what I want to do is raise money. And then during the process, you also share, like we think about the process as a collaborative thing where we can talk about some of the challenges that you're facing. We can do some brainstorming, we can do some whiteboarding, but it's really important because I think one thing that we already talked about is everyone's super busy and everyone has time is a zero-sum game. So be upfront, like, look, we're raising this amount of money to achieve X, Y, and Z milestones. This is what we know, this is what we don't know, and we're looking for a partner to help us get there. And part of that process can be about advice, but don't veil searching for advice when really what you're looking to do is to fundraise.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so I guess the cat's out of the bag there. Everyone knows that phrase and in the startup world and uses it. So you're saying be more upfront if you're really looking for money.
If you're looking to fundraise, there's nothing wrong with fundraising. Right. I mean, that's your number one job as a CEO, as was mentioned earlier, is to not run out of money. So let's have that conversation.
That makes sense. All right. So now that, we're talking about those same lines, I wanted to kind of figure out, you mentioned like you have an email, Jamira, that people can reach out to. Brendan, you did as well. How would startup founders find, let's say, you, if they didn't know how to do that? I mean, back in the day, when we could do like bigger events, I actually created one years ago that we used to host events all over the country where it connected people, things like that, what we're doing right here, right? This would normally be in real life in person, right? And so I guess, what are some tips or tricks for people to walk away with to kind of be able to find investors like you?
I think now in the age of social media, it's probably easier to find investors than ever before. So I can speak to our fund. All of us are on Twitter and all of our Twitter DMs are open. I get a ton of deal flow just through my Twitter DMs. All of us are LinkedIn. I'm less likely to check my LinkedIn messages, but people can reach us via LinkedIn. Many of us write, and at the end of our blog posts, we all say, if you want to reach us at jamira@cowboy.vc. So you can find, if you don't find our email out there, like that's more concerning to me because we put it absolutely everywhere. We make it as easy as possible for you to find our information. So that's our orientation. I know not all firms are like this, but that's really what we focus on.
Brendan, do you have any thoughts? Frank?
Yeah, I think I saw an interesting tweet, funny enough, the other day where a startup founder was saying had about tenfold interactions with VCs on Twitter than LinkedIn. So kind of goes back to LinkedIn, super saturated, getting messages day in and day out. I mean, I still check them. I think the core message here is leave no stone unturned. Twitter, LinkedIn. I would say, even though I gave that example of the elevator pitch, I wouldn't show up cold to our office, but
not today anyway.
Yeah, well, we won't be there, first of all.
Right.
But yeah, but obviously events, when that gets back up and running, if you can get access to an event, the attendee list, map out like who are the top 5-10 people. It may sound a little bit creepy, but figure out what their face looks like. Go on LinkedIn, even have maybe a cheat sheet going into that, because I think we know how events work, right? You talk to one person, you look up again, it's 30 minutes gone, and you only have another 30 minutes. So, but yeah, anyways, and then emails, we're not shy about it. Mine is Brendan.Schmidt at SeattleVentures.com. You can kind of basically put in same convention, but I would try each way. Everyone has their own system, and they're bound to respond to one of them. So,
okay, Frank.
Yeah, so I got an email yesterday from an insurtech company that's right about at the point of Series A, and the VP of Finance there said, "Can you give me the names of 2 VCs who might be interested?" Mm-hmm. So I did a quick scan through it. Who's within a reasonable radius of these guys. It's relatively early stage, and there are 150 firms. These guys are doing. There are 150 firms that have got some interest in doing insurtech or have done other companies like it. And the response to that is just go set aside the time to reach out to all of them and do the research and who's funded other companies like you, who's funded your competitors, and instead of asking for what are 2 introductions is just not that productive, because you can reach everybody relatively easily and with a little persistence, just like Jamira and Brendan, you've been saying, and you need to set aside the time to make your network big.
So let's dive a little deeper into that, because I agree. The tools are out there. You all have said that you're all very accessible. You're all out there. Your info is out there. But if I'm a novice and I don't know anything about starting up, I'm new to the area, whatever, what tools do I use specifically to dive in? Obviously, I would start at Google and start there. But let's say, I don't even know what that is. How do I get started? How do I find those 150 investors that are in insurtech if I'm just totally oblivious to the world?
Google is a great resource. You can also go on Crunchbase. You can get a pretty cheap account. I think they even have a monthly free trial. You can go on Crunchbase and search investors that have invested in this sector or have invested in this particular company or their competitors. And you can pull that list, export a CSV, and then all of a sudden you have a list of those investors. And then for each of those, you can go online and try to find their email or their information. Most of them have an info ad or hello ad or hi at the very least, or you can find them on Twitter. You can DM them. Right. Twitter is another resource. You can go and actually search particular hashtags or search, there are a bunch of lists that are out there of fintech investors or insurtech investors or consumer investors. You can go there and search who are the most common investors in those categories. So those are just a couple of ways. CB Insights does a lot of reports on like the most active seed investors, the most active fintech investors. So those are a couple of resources to look at.
Great.
Jamira, I think, definitely if you can get a Crunchbase pitch book, something like that, I think it's going to save you a lot of time. If you don't want to go that route, a lot of times investors will put, they're part of a company. So go, whether you're looking at like maybe a similar company that's later stage, go to that company. Usually like one of the VCs will have like board member there. So you can kind of know who led the investment from the team. It's also, on the website for a lot of the venture firms, it's like, this is who led the deal. I guess the other thing is look for common connections on LinkedIn. So, with some of these investors, again, it's like trying to find like a common ground. So it's like, who went to your school? That's like an investor. You can do these advanced search if you like paid for like a LinkedIn premium, or, hey, we used to work at, I used to work at Gartner. It's like, oh, we used to work at Gartner together. Like find like some of these like kind of warm things you can warm up like these cold reach outs for. And it will do wonders, I think, in getting these people to respond normally. So.
Great.
My experience is almost every investor I know is an outgoing, friendly person. It's just who's like on this panel, but like, it's just who who the industry attracts. And so as you start to make the first couple calls, at the end of each call, be asking, who else should I get to know? You're going to get some really nuanced information, maybe a warm intro, but plan to network your way through the investor community.
That's a great ask to remember. I think that's a great advice. At the end of that conversation, they know other folks that might be interested. So great point there. And I think one that I think we hinted on slightly, I don't remember who said it, but other entrepreneurs, right? You can navigate your network of other entrepreneurs and startup founders that have been invested in by other investors are probably your biggest champions because they know you and they can make a nice warm intro. And I know that doesn't always happen and you're not connected to a lot of people, but if you are, maybe aren't, maybe build that network up first and then, go that direction too. Because I think that's one way to get into some of those other investors that may not be as interested.
Yeah, Frank, we, at our last LP meeting, we actually broke down kind of a pie chart of where did the deal referrals come in? And there was a good chunk that was from entrepreneurial connections. So referrals. So yeah.
Right. And they're probably not going to refer a company that they don't believe in or a person they don't believe in. Right. So I think that's the other thing. So it's a little bit of a vetting process for you as well. When you start to hear that, that's usually the case. All right. So I think we hit that one pretty well. There are also, I wanted to touch on this and get your take. There also are online platforms like Gust and AngelList, and I know those used to be, I don't know if those are still as readily used, but wanted to get your take on some of those platforms for finding you and other investors.
I'll just speak for us. We actually just prefer you go direct to us as opposed to trying to use some kind of intermediary. I think NFX also has a site as well, and those are fine. Like, we don't hold it against anyone who wants to use this, but for us, we try to make it relatively simple that you can reach out to us. So we rather that you reach out directly, and that's where we get most of our deal flow from.
Okay. Anyone else want to add anything? So we can move on otherwise.
This actually might be a good place for us to weigh in. The work we do with relatively early stage companies is explicitly not to act as an intermediary for them. Probably one of the big pieces of advice we give to people is, look, people are looking to back you. You've got to go make this call. We can help you know what good looks like for material. But I think to the extent that there are people who are sort of tempted to go find an intermediary who's going to do some of the sales work of capital raising for a CEO, don't. It doesn't help you to have somebody else in between. You're going to need to get out and do this yourself.
There's no silver bullet.
100%, Frank. Great founders are able to sell their vision and passion themselves. So it is, it doesn't rule out, but I think, if someone comes to the phone and, the CEO founder is not leading the discussion, it's, maybe an intermediary, it's maybe something might be a little bit off about the situation, but every situation has its own caveats as well. So
let me ask a follow-up to that, because we're talking about raising. What about, like, you've already built the company and now you're looking at the exits side of it and maybe like an M&A strategy? How do you guys feel about that side of it with bringing somebody on to help build those relationships? It's a different set potentially.
That, if I can go and speak, that's a place where a really collaborative approach to who's going to make what calls makes a huge difference. Because sometimes there are situations where you'd rather someone else raise the idea in a relatively anonymous way. But there are other times when there's when there's a really strong personal CEO to CEO relationship, and the sale of a company, for all, I think startup founders and CEOs end up doing lots of fundraising conversations again and again and again. People just don't do sales that often, do sales of companies that often in their careers. So having at least a guide, but probably also someone who can be an intermediary for you, does make a big difference at sale. And the other thing I think some people sometimes don't realize is just what a bear of a project it is. And how much difference it makes that you are crazy well organized when you go to start those conversations. And that leads to getting some kind of help. We do it for people, but a really experienced VP of finance or CFO doing it, or maybe in some cases one of your investors doing it, makes a huge amount of difference in terms of how efficient and effective a company sale is.
Yeah,
Great.
I totally agree. I think it's fairly common when you're pursuing the sell route to hire a banker, hire some support, because it's not, as Frank mentioned, it's not something that you don't do it very often. A founder might need to do it once in their life. And so making sure that it is an efficient process, that you have all your ducks in a row. It is such an important point in time that you have to get some support and some help.
Yeah, I agree. That completely different situation than kind of the fundraising conversation we were just talking about. So completely different skill set, type of transaction. But I will say, even if you're a seed A founder, it's okay to plant seeds that early. Like we have, it's always in the back of our head is, who are the likely suspects to end up buying this company, if they don't go the IPO route. So it's okay to make those intros. Whereas a founder, you think about, hey, XYZ companies, I should start building those relationships because, later on in our cycle, they may be, needing that part of the, to acquire that part of their product portfolio going forward. So.
Great. All right. So let's jump into, we'll dial it back. You've now connected with these startup founders, and they've maybe raised some funds from you or others. And how do you want to stay in touch with them? We mentioned newsletters and things like that to kind of keep people updated. Are there other ways or best practices for entrepreneurs that want to be better connected with y'all?
Is this, are you saying post-investing?
Post-investment. Yep.
Yeah. So at least for us, it depends on the firm. For us, we only make about 8 investments a year. So each investment is a pretty high conviction one. And it allows us the time to actually be action oriented. And so at minimum, we have a quarterly board meeting for most of the companies that we invest in. But more likely, we are talking on a monthly cadence and in a formal way, and then an informal way, probably once a week, if not more often. It ebbs and flows depending on the time of need. But for us, we very much have, we try to say, like, you can reach us anytime. And so we tend to be pretty open in terms of communication. And then we also host a lot of events for our founders as well.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I would say, similar approach. We do about 10, 15 new investments per year. When we back founders, you're immediately part of the Sierra family. So really a collaborative approach across the team. Like Jeremiah said, quarterly board meetings. A lot of our partners do monthly calls with the founders, always have an open line of communication. I sit on the business development side of things. So I'm basically an extension of 50 to 60 of our companies, go to market, customer acquisition efforts, help them with things like analyst relations. So they kind of reach out to me and say, hey, can I get in front of XYZ customer and get feedback for those guys? So just opening up doors for them. I have a colleague that runs a platform. She does a really good job sending them resources, putting on events for them to kind of learn different practices that they should be, and then helping them with really a lot of the executive recruiting functions or any of the recruiting functions that they need as they try to build out their team and grow as a company. So.
Great, Frank. You're a little bit different as far as the way you work with companies. So maybe twist the question a little bit.
Yeah. So here's we end up doing a lot of work for VC-backed companies that haven't grown like people hope they would. And they've been in the portfolio a long time. It's time for that thing to have a new home. Mm-hmm. And so we are often witnessing strained investor and CEO relationships, or even strained board relationships. And I'd say, what we see in that is, that that leads to better outcomes is, one, keep listening to your investors. And there are going to be times when you get on different pages, but you've got to resolve that. They're your business partners. Mm-hmm. Two, keep a good dashboard that communicates two things. One is you've got your arms around the issues that the business faces, whether it's how fast you're growing or whether it's dealing with growing not as fast as people had hoped. But have a good dashboard to talk about and be on time and responsive about getting that material out. It only increases anxiety and increases friction if, when you've got a set of investors who want to be communicating every month, mm-hmm. and you're going silent, right, 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, it's not a good sign.
I'd say just remembering that it's, your investors are partners in what you're doing. They near the end of a hold might have different goals than you have because they eventually need an exit. And so, but they can, if you're all working together, they can exit without your ending your business. And so it doesn't mean, the whole thing is collapsing, just you're rotating the investors, but stay close to people.
Great. And we're almost out of time here, but I wanted to kind of do one more around the horn, and everyone close their eyes and think about your favorite relationship with an entrepreneur. And if you could just boil down the one thing that they do that makes it so great, and then we'll go around the horn real quick and then kind of end on some final thoughts and how to connect with y'all.
I can go first. I think the most important thing is honesty. The founders that I think we have the best relationship with are honest and transparent. And I think the other piece is I like frequent informal communication. So I rather just touch base a couple of times a week, but in an informal way. And that allows for you to build the rapport and the social side, but also make sure that we're in sync on the business. Because the worst part is when an update is a surprise.
Right. Great point.
Yeah, I would say really like the entrepreneurs that by the end of it, they're giving me homework and they know, and going into it, they know exactly what they want to talk about. And honesty is great. So it's like, look, here's what's going well. Here's what I want to talk about in this 30 minutes. And then at the end, they recap and say, hey, here's what I need from you. That's always great to kind of not play this guessing game and just figure out, how can I help you? I'm going to spend, an hour in my week to help you. Here's the 3 things that would be most impactful. So being very direct and prescriptive on how we can work together.
Great advice. Frank?
I'd say our twist on it is the people know their roles and they treat each other as peers. And I think that leads to a lot of things that Brandon, you and Jamira both talked about. But CEO knows he or she is the CEO, and the board members know they're there to have money come in and have money go out and have a return. And everyone works well together on a common project with different roles.
Great advice and great thoughts. All right, so one more around the horn. I want to just make sure everyone can connect with you. Where can people find you if they would like to? I mean, you mentioned earlier, I just want to make sure that people have it in case they didn't scribble it down before. So Jamira, Brendan, and Frank, we'll just keep going in the same order.
hello@cowboy.bc. That's a great way to reach us.
Great. Brendan?
Yeah, so Twitter, Brendan, kind of a wonky way to spell it, but I think you can see it on the Zoom, _ Schmidt. Mm-hmm. And then brendan.schmidt@sierraventures.com. And pretty unique spelling of my name. So I think you could probably find me on LinkedIn pretty easily as well.
Great. Frank?
So you'll find us on LinkedIn and on oaklynconsulting.com.
Great. Thank you all for being a part of it. Really appreciate it. Great advice. Hopefully people are out there building some relationships based off your input and feedback.